Hare Krishna, a very warm welcome to everyone to our class on the Nectar of Devotion. Today we are going to start our discussion on chapter number 14. The title that Srila Prabhupada has given to this chapter is Devotional Qualifications. Overall, this will be our 16th class on this subject. Now I'll request Anuradha Mataji to kindly lead the chanting of Mangalacharan prayers. Anuradha Mataji, over to
Okay.
you.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Om Ajnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatvam Tam Cha Jeevam साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता विशाखान्वितं च हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धु जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कान्ता राधा कान्ता नमोऽस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे.
Thank you, Anuradha Mataji. Thank you very much. Very
Thank
nicely
you, Prabhu.
chanted.
Hare
Thank you.
Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Now we move to the summary of class 15th, and I would like to invite Vasudevan Prabhu for kindly presenting the summary of class number 15th. Prabhuji,
Hare Krishna.
over to you. Hare Krishna. If you
Hare
can open
Krishna.
your video also, that the devotees can
I
also
think it
look
is
at you.
switched on. My video
Okay.
is on.
Yeah.
Can you see my video?
I can see.
Yeah. Hare Krishna to all devotees, all Matajis and Prabhujis. Hare Krishna. It's a good opportunity for me. Anyway, the last class was a very interesting class, and I'm happy that I got the opportunity to present the summary. So we started with limb number 61, Sri Bhagavat Artha Swado. So relishing Bhagavatam. Now here we saw about relishing Bhagavatam, we saw the example of Sukadeva Goswami discussed. Sukadeva Goswami, even though he was in perfect transcendence, he was still, when his father Vyasadeva recited Bhagavatam to him, he was attracted by the verses of the Bhagavatam, and in turn he propagates that. So even somebody who's Sukadeva Goswami, we know, was liberated even when he was born, still he the relishing Bhagavatam, because of the taste of the Bhagavatam, he's still able to relish and get some more interest in it. So that is the beauty of Bhagavatam, and that is why we are all very keen to start with Bhagavatam after this. Then we saw limb 62, where Sajati Yasya Snigdam Sri Bhagavat Bhakta Sangha, Bhagavad Bhakta Sangha. So this is association of like-minded, affectionate devotees. So here we have to understand, this is about like-minded and affectionate. They are the important words, as Prabhuji pointed out. Now, there were two examples we discussed. This Saunaka Muni, when he is addressing other rishis at Naimisharanyam, he is telling them that even a moment's association with a devotee, with a pure devotee of the Lord, is more precious than heaven or material benefits, or even liberation from material miseries. So even one moment's association with a devotee takes you on the path of devotion. Then similarly, we also saw the analogy of the crystal which Hiranyakashipu gave to Prahlad. What Hiranyakashipu was telling Prahlad was, your association is so important. It is like a crystal. crystal you place on anything, it takes the color of that object. If you place crystal on a green object, it takes the color of green. See, that is the importance of association. He was advising Prahlad, even though he was a demon, still the example of the importance of association is equally valid. And that's where Prabhupada also concludes this by saying that if the deliverer and receiver of spiritual knowledge are sincere, then it is bound to produce good results. Then we moved on to limb 63, which is Srinama Sankirtanam. And the Srinama is chanting of holy names. Now, here we saw many things on this. Now, this chanting delivers all the three results. Which are the three results? It results fruitive results for the karmi. It delivers liberation for the jnani, mystic perfection for the yogis, as well as bhakti for the devotion, or bhakti or devotion for those who are aspire to serve at the lotus feet of the Lord. And similarly, this we have three important processes which are named. One is Shravanam, Kirtanam, and Smaranam. That is hearing, chanting, and remembering. Even out of these, chanting is considered the most supreme. Then again, within chanting also, we have three types of chanting. Chanting of Lord's name, chanting of pastimes, and chanting of qualities. And here again, out of all these types of chanting, chanting of the name is considered most supreme. And chanting of name, we say the Lord's name is no different from the Lord. It is as good as interacting with the Lord. And this is also confirmed by Krishna to Arjuna in Adi Purana. Krishna tells Arjuna that singing my names, those who are constantly singing my names, they have constant association with me. So if somebody is singing Lord's name, what Lord is telling that he is associated with him. So that is the power of singing. And then we also saw this another quote saying that in whoever lips Harinama is constantly present. It means he has been worshipping Vasudeva for 1,000 births. So what is the significance of 1,000 births? So Prabhuji very nicely pointed out that this 1,000 births, the Lord goes on increasing the devotion until he reaches a stage where all the time he's only thinking of the Lord and Lord's name is permanently present in his lips. Then we moved on to limb 64. Limb 64 is Mathura Mandale Sthita, which is residing in Mathura. And this residing in Mathura, so we saw 3-4 examples. One is that bhakti can be attained even by staying in Mathura, not even for a day, even for a few seconds. By staying in Mathura, even for a few seconds, we can attain bhakti. And again, here also we saw the same thing. Residing in Mathura also delivers all the three results. It delivers fruitive results for karmis. It delivers liberation for salvationists. And it delivers bhakti for devotees. And Prabhupada concludes his commentary with a wonderful statement saying that Mathura must be more glorious than Vaikuntha Dhama. So that is the level at which Mathura, residing in Mathura, is placed by Vaishnavas. Then we moved on to the 5, out of all these 64 limbs, the 5 potent forms, which are the 5 most potent forms of bhakti. And these are the last 5 limbs. And which are these last 5 limbs? Sri Murti Seva, relishing Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Bhakta Sangha, and Nama Samkirtana, and Mathura Vasa. These are the 5 limbs which are considered most important and most beneficial. Now here we saw some very specific examples in each of these. So first is, even if there is a small attachment to these items, any of these 5 items, a person who is devoid of offenses will attain the level of bhava. Bhava is considered the topmost level of bhakti. So these 5 processes are so powerful that even a small attachment to one of them, if we are not having offenses, if we are devoid of offenses, can take us to the level of bhava. So you can imagine. Now, going into each one of them, so about Mathuravasi and Srimati says, and we have Rupa Goswami composing these slokas in a different priti, like the opposite. He's criticizing the quality to emphasize. I'll just give the simple English meaning, where he says, if one sees the threefold bending form of Krishna at Keshi Tirtha, he will forget his desire to enjoy with friends and relatives. So Krishna's murti at Mathura is so powerful, so encapsulating, that if one sees this threefold bending, we say bend at the neck and bend at the shoulder and the knees, one immediately forgets the material world and becomes engrossed. So this can be taken both for Mathuravasa as well as Sri Murti. Then similarly about releasing Bhagavatam, what is this? Again, the verse by Srila Rupa Goswami is in the same format. He says, if one hears all the syllables one by one of 10th canto of Bhagavatam, his ears will denounce the goals of dharma, artha, kama, and impersonal liberation. So it is Bhagavatam 10th canto is so powerful that one forgets everything, not only everything material, even the lower benefits than serving the lotus feet of Lord. Serving the lotus feet of the Lord is the only thing on his mind. Then Bhagavad Bhakta Sangha. So the power of seeing a devotee. Here there is a very good quote. The quote says, ever since I saw a person whose body was washed with his own tears, whose hair were standing on end, and who stumbled around with a joyous heart while quivering to the extreme, my attachment to my family is completely evaporated. I have no attachment to my family, and I am attached only to Krishna. So that is showing the power of Bhagavad Sangha, or when one sees a devotee. Then similarly, for attachment to the Sri Murti, if one becomes attached to Sri Murti, that is the deity of Krishna, so-called friendship, love, and society, going to clubs, cinemas, and dancing parties, smoking, etc., will be forgotten. So again, it's another example that all the material, we lose interest in the material activities, we'll lose interest in the material pleasures, and we'll become so completely absorbed in Murti Seva. And Prabhuji also shared his personal experience on this. And then lastly, we come to the power of chanting. Again, power of chanting, the example of given of Narada Muni, he was called Vainika. So says the inconceivable power of, so the power of chanting Narada Muni, that is what here they are sharing, is once having heard Narada Muni chanting the names of the Lord, I have become totally absorbed in Krishna. And here Narada Muni is referred to as Vainika, which means it's a common name for any bhakta who is in the same similar state to Narada. That's why specifically Narada Muni's name is not used instead of Vainika. So anybody who is singing Lord's names with great devotion will have the same effect on the listener. So finally, Prabhupada concludes that the inconceivable power of these extraordinary 5 angas is such that it will manifest the state of bhava and its object, Krishna, at the same time. So it not only gives you bhava bhakti, it also manifests Krishna. So that is the power of these 5, and Prabhupada also adds there is no overestimation, and for this he is giving 2 examples: example of the 4 Kumaras and examples of Bilva Mangala Thakura, which we have seen in the last class. I will not repeat that example. Now, the only thing that I want to add is, see, Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu itself is supposed to be nectar. And even among that nectar, I think these last 5 limbs are the essence of that nectar, or let's say extract of that nectar. And finally, I feel that having got this opportunity to give the summary of these last 5 limbs, both individually and together, see, I have got this thing, the extract of the nectar I am able to taste. Thank you for this opportunity, Prabhuji. I hope I was able to do some justice to the task
No,
entrusted.
Prabhu, you did a big justice. I really enjoyed your presentation. Really, it was relishing to hear from your lotus lips. Uh, uh, Vasudevan Prabhu comes from a Sri Vaishnava background, uh, and a very, very sincere and a very dedicated soul on the path of bhakti. Really, very inspired to come in association with Vasudevan Prabhu. And Prabhu is also taking his own classes and developing many people on the path of bhakti. So really grateful that Prabhuji is part of our class. Really appreciate. Uh, so regarding these 5 potent forms, I think I missed to mention one point in my previous class, which was about that if you see the ISKCON society and the setup that Srila Prabhupada has done, the way Srila Prabhupada has done the setup of ISKCON society, the kind of programs, the kind of schedule he has mentioned or has designed in the ISKCON society. This is actually reflecting of these 5 angas of bhakti, the the last 5 limbs, limb number 60, 61, 62, 63, 64. Sri Murti Seva, Bhagavatam, Bhagavat, Bhakt Sangha, Nam Sankirtan, Mathura Vas. So you would see that Sri Murti Seva, the deity worship that Srila Prabhupada has taken, he has largely taken the ways of deity worship is coming from mainly Sri Vaishnav Sampradaya. So in Sri Vaishnav Sampradaya, the mood of worship generally is in the Aishwarya Bhav. Aishwarya Bhav means, oh Lord, you are so great, you are so magnificent, you are so venerable. In that mood of respect, like we worship kings, huh? Like in the mood of that they are worshipping a king. Yeah? So that is the way that opulent worship Srila Prabhupada has picked up from Sri Vaishnav Sampradaya. And then in the morning programs in ISKCON, you will see, you will, when you go to the temple, every morning in the temple there will be a Bhagavatam class. One devotee will be identified and he will be presenting Srimad Bhagavatam to other group of people. Bhagavad Bhakt Sangha. So ISKCON itself is a society. Society means there are those people who are eager to develop or eager to come together to relish the association of devotional mood. So that is what ISKCON society itself is. So you would see that many places these are temples, these are communities. So Bhagavad Bhakt Sangha, that is the purpose. The Nam Sankirtan and ISKCON devotees are popularly known as Hare Krishna devotees. And why they are popularly known as Hare Krishna devotees? Because they constantly sing Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So Nam Sankirtan is the very essence of this movement. And Mathura Vas. So in order to facilitate stay in the holy dham, Srila Prabhupada has taken all the pains to construct important temples. So we have a Krishna Balram Mandir in Sri Dham Vrindavan. We also have Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir in Mayapur, where which is the Leela Sthali of Shriman Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Like that, these projects were taken up so that it will facilitate Mathura Vas or stay in the holy places. So this point I forgot to mention in my previous class, and a very nice presentation by Vasudevan Prabhu. Let us now move a little bit to our the program or our new class for today, class number 16th. And I will skip these first couple of slides. I think I have repeated them enough in my previous classes, so you should be able to notice them. And directly jumping to the topic of the class today, which is chapter number 14. And you will see we will complete chapter number 14 today. And a lot of verses are being covered today from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is starting from 248 and continues up to 269. And with the completion of chapter 14 today, we will actually complete the discussion on the 64 limbs of bhakti that we started, I think, from chapter number 6. So chapter number 6, we started the 64 limbs. In chapter number 6, a list was given, and then from chapter number 7 onwards, Srila Rup Goswami started giving evidences for each of the limbs. And our classes on 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th chapter are almost the elaboration on the 64 limbs of bhakti. Today we will conclude this discussion on 64 limbs, and the title of this chapter is Devotional Qualifications. Now, I have added that part, the chapter number 14, just to give you an idea of what is the topic, what is the main subject matter or the theme that we will discuss in chapter number 14. And that is, the theme is relation of other practices to Vaidhi Sadhan Bhakti. I will repeat, relation of other practices to Vaidhi Sadhan Bhakti. Now, what are these other practices? That we will discuss today. You might have seen in your own life, in your own experience, that in Vedic way of living, or popularly known today as Hindu Dharma, there are many other uh, practices that we see. Like, for example, people might be doing some fasting. Like a very popular fasting is the fasting on the Karwa Chauth. That is one of the main popular fasting. And there are similar other ceremonies, like, for example, Shraddha ceremony. There is a Vivaha ceremony, the marriage ceremony, etc., etc. Now, these are all parts of Hindu culture, Hindu society, or in general, if we call it as Vedic society or Vedic philosophy. But what is the relation? Because these practices are not mentioned in the 64 limbs of bhakti. So, what is the relation of these 64 limbs of bhakti together with the other practices that we also see in the Vedic fold? That is the topic of this particular chapter, chapter number 14. And I have given this introduction in the form of a slide here. Uh, I will read point by point just to make sure that I have not missed any of those. Srila Rup Goswami now now starts to conclude discussion on Vaidhi Sadhan Bhakti. So far, he has given these 64 limbs, emphasized on the last 5 limbs that these are most potent, and then now he starts to conclude this discussion. And while concluding this discussion, he is now taking examples of various common spiritual practices that are not mentioned in the list of 64 limbs. And these spiritual practices now have been broadly categorized by Srila Rupa Goswami in these 6 categories. One is Varnashram, second one is Gyan, third one is Vairagya, and then through Dhana means wealth, through Shishya means followers, and through Vivek and other material good qualities. So Vivek means discrimination, and other material good qualities, for example, like Ahimsa, non-violence, or Shaucham means cleanliness. So in any of these 64 limbs, none of these qualities like Ahimsa, Shaucham, and truthfulness, these are not being mentioned. So what is the connection of these material qualities with the 64 limbs of sadhan, Vaidhi Sadhan Bhakti? That commentary, or that comment Srila Rupa Goswami will make, it's a very important comment. It is very important for us to understand the relation between the practices, the pure practices of bhakti, versus those practices which seemingly may appear devotional, but actually they are not categorized under the category of 64 limbs of bhakti. And these are Varnashram, Gyan, Vairagya, Dhan, Shishya, and good qualities. Are these items part of devotional service? So the answer is no. If they are not part of devotional service, then what is their relationship with Vaidhi Sadhan Bhakti? That is what we are going to discuss. Now, just to give you a little more precise where this discussion starts in Nectar of Devotion, actually this discussion starts right at the end of chapter number 13. So we concluded chapter number 13 in the previous class, but we did not took note of the last 2 paragraphs, which is paragraph number 11 and paragraph number 12 in the book of chapter number 13, which actually is mainly related with the theme of Varnashram uh, prominent practice that are not limbs of bhakti. So varnashram is not a limb of bhakti, and that discussion actually starts in the end of chapter number 13, and then this discussion ends in chapter number 14. So this is just to mention you that actually this discussion starts in at the end of chapter number 13. And now let us move to that specific portion of the end of chapter number 13, where this particular discussion actually starts. And the theme is prominent practices that are not limbs of bhakti and that are not covered in that 64 items that Srila Rupa Goswami has given. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, the very first limb, the very first prominent practice that is not considered in the limb of bhakti is actually varnashram. The varnashram is not a limb of bhakti as such. And let us have a short discussion on how we can understand this particular theme, how varnashram is not considered as a limb of bhakti. Now, before we go into that discussion, that varnashram is not considered a limb of bhakti, first of all, we understand what exactly are the practices, what exactly are the prescribed duties of varna and ashram. Now, Srila Prabhupada gives this definition of what are the prescribed duties of varna and ashram in the in paragraph number 11. If you read Nectar of Devotion, here Prabhupada writes, uh, these are ritualistic ceremonies of religion intended for economic development, that is artha, sense gratification, that is kama, and salvation, that is moksha. So please pay attention to how Srila Prabhupada mentions ritualistic ceremonies of religion intended for economic development, that is artha, sense gratification, that is kama, and ultimately moksha. So what Srila Prabhupada is trying to explain about the prescribed duties of Varna and Ashram is that these are actually ritualistic ceremonies of religion. Ritualistic ceremonies of religion means uh, that by following some religious practices, by following some religious rituals, we try to focus mainly on four things, I would say: dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So here you will see dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. There are four pillars of any religious life. Now, if you see carefully, here dharma and moksha are the spiritual part, and kama and artha, they are the material part. Now, the Vedic philosophy or the Vedic way of living uh, focuses both on the uh, uh, material benefit as well as the spiritual benefit, or I would say the material development as well as the spiritual development. It is a balanced program. It is not only focusing only on the material part, neither it is only focusing on the spiritual part. It's a balanced program, because the Vedic philosophy understands that the human being, uh, when it comes to material world, if only the spiritual aspect is focused, because the material because the human nature uh, uh, by and large wants to have some material benefit, material advancement. That is the human nature by and large. But only material advancement doesn't benefit the human life. It will lead to misery, it will lead to ultimately dukkha. So a program of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha has been mentioned in the Vedic philosophy, so that the human being can utilize religion, that is dharma, to progress on artha and kama. Artha means economic development, and kama means to enjoy its sense gratification. Sense gratification means it has some enjoying tendencies. So they can enjoy through religious, moralistic, ethical way of living. They can both enjoy artha and kama, and ultimately, if they do enjoy artha and kama in a religious way, ultimately this kind of living will take them to salvation. Salvation means liberation, or in Sanskrit we call it moksha. So that is these are the prescribed duties of varna and ashram. And what are these ritualistic ceremonies of religion? These ritualistic ceremonies of religion could be several yagyas that people may want to do while they are in a particular varna or in a particular ashram. And a very prominent example of a yagya is a vivaha yagya, a marriage ceremony. So the idea of marriage ceremony is that a boy and a girl come together, take vows to enter into a grahastha ashram. The very word ashram actually is connoting towards something where a spiritual culture is prominent. So ashram means a place where spiritual culture is prominent and prevailing. So we don't simply call it as grahastha, we call it as a grahastha ashram. So by doing this vivaha yagya, a boy and a girl come together and take a vow to make their home an ashram. A home and ashram means ultimately they will live together. They will enjoy sense gratification. They will also pursue for economic development. They will also have children. They will also enjoy each other's company, etc. But ultimately, the objective is to make their grahastha as an ashram. Ashram means where they will actually focus towards religious values. They will follow dharma, and ultimately by through following dharma they will purify themselves, and ultimately they will move towards transcendence. They will move towards moksha. So that is the whole setup of varna and ashram. And while doing this varna and ashram, while entering into this varna and ashram, there are various ritualistic religious ceremonies, mainly to improve our artha, improve our sense gratification, and ultimately moving towards moksha. So that is the main focus of varna and ashram. But varna and ashram has not been considered as a limb of bhakti. So in order to explain this, the marriage is in and of itself is not a limb of bhakti. But if marriage is aimed at eventual purification and unalloyed surrender towards Lord Krishna, it can be considered a subsidiary item of devotional service. So by definition, a marriage is not considered as a limb of bhakti. But if the husband and wife who come in the institution of marriage ultimately decide that their marriage actually is for their purification, and ultimately they decide to direct their institution of marriage uh, towards unalloyed surrender towards Lord Krishna, then it can be considered as a subsidiary item of devotional service. But in independent sense, marriage is not considered as a part of bhakti. Now let us so this was a the previous slide was a kind of an introduction to give you an explanation of what is varna and ashram, give you one example, and tell you that if varna and ashram is directed towards devotional service of Lord Krishna, then it can be considered as a limb of bhakti, but otherwise it is not considered as a limb of bhakti. Now let us see how Srila Rupa Goswami in these two verses 246 and 247 in Bhakti Samrat Sindhu chapter 2, uh, how uh, how Srila Rupa Goswami explain this topic. First of all, he makes a statement in verse number 246. What Srila Rupa Goswami says is, the consensus of those knowledgeable in bhakti is that karma, that is varnashram duties, is not anga of bhakti. Karma means here the karma kanda. The karma kanda means the various ritualistic ceremonies that take place in the varnashram. Uh, these are not anga of bhakti. And he's saying the consensus of those knowledgeable in bhakti. So he's quoting that the authorities of bhakti, those people who understand uttama bhakti, their consensus is that varnashram duties is not anga of bhakti. Now, in order to support this statement that Srila Rupa Goswami has given, Srila Prabhupada gives two references. And one of the references Srila Prabhupada gives is from Chaitanya Charitamrita. Now, Chaitanya Charitamrit is a book which we have not mentioned so elaborately in our classes so far. We have given several references from Chaitanya Charitamrit also, but have not given a lot of references, a lot of elaborate details about Chaitanya Charitamrit. So Chaitanya Charitamrit is about the life and teachings of Shriman Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is none other than the incarnation of Lord Krishna himself, who descended upon this material world almost 500 years ago. And the Sankirtan movement that you see in the form of ISKCON and other various Vaishnav mathas like Gaudiya Math and other programs is actually has been started by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrit, which is the life story of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there is a discussion between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and one of the devotees, or I would say a close associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by the name Ramanand Rai. So Srila Prabhupada gives a reference about this dialogue between Ramanand Rai and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in order to support this statement which Srila Rup Goswami has given about Varnashram duties. Here, now what happens in this dialogue between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramanand Rai? It's a very important dialogue, and generally there are classes available specifically on this particular dialogue. And but what is the focus? What is the subject matter of this dialogue? In this dialogue, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asks a very simple question from Ramanand Rai. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asks, "O Ramanand Rai, can you please recite a verse from the scriptures, from the Shastra, which tells us about the ultimate goal of life, the topmost goal of life? Where do we want to go?" And Mahaprabhu, and then Ramanand Rai starts to give some answers to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in all, his answers can be classified into 12 categories. So he gives something like 12 answers, starting from one answer. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejects. No, no, this is not the topmost. This is not the ultimate. Then Ramananda Rai gives another answer. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejects that answer also. No, this is not the ultimate. Then he moves to the next answer. Mahaprabhu rejects to that answer also. Like that, he goes on and on and on. And ultimately, he comes to the 12th answer where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, "Yes, this is the ultimate goal of life." Like that, this dialogue goes on. Now, for devotees, this is very relishing to hear on the various moods, various aspects of spiritual uh, practices that we actually relate ourselves with throughout our devotional career. And here, a very nice categorization of each of these has been given in a very sequential manner. So, Ramananda Rai, interestingly, starts his answer with Varnashram. Ramanand Rai says that following one's own prescribed duties as per our Varna and as per our ashrama actually is the ultimate goal of life. Then Mahaprabhu rejects Ramanand Rai's answer that no, Varnashram actually is not the ultimate goal of life. Then Ramanand Rai actually goes to the next level. He says that Krishna Karmarpana. So, not only following our prescribed duties, but actually offering our prescribed duties to Lord Krishna. That is the second answer that Ramananda Rai gives. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejects that answer also. And like that, the dialogue continues. So in this class, we will not go into the detail of that discussion between Ramananda Rai and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because our focus is mainly uh, to understand why Varnashram duty is not a Anga of Bhakti. Here, Srila Prabhupada, in order to support this statement by Srila Rupa Goswami, is giving a reference of dialogue between Ramananda Rai and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejected Ramananda Rai's answer of Varnashram when he was asked, "What is the ultimate goal of life?" So, this is one reference. The second reference comes from Srimad Bhagavad Gita itself. And in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which is in the 18th chapter, there is a shloka that Shri Krishna recites to Arjuna. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshishyami ma shuchaha. Here Lord Krishna is reciting this verse and he's saying that abandon all varieties of religion. Sarva dharman parityajya. Now, what varieties of religion is Lord Krishna referring here? Because Lord Krishna, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, has been giving Arjuna all kind of varieties of religion. In this Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna talks about Karma Kanda, Lord Krishna talks about Karma Yoga, Lord Krishna talks about Varnashram, Lord Krishna talks about Jnana Yoga, Lord Krishna talks about Dhyana Yoga, etc. etc. And but ultimately, Lord Krishna says, abandon all varieties of religion and simply surrender unto me. So that itself is an indication that surrender unto Lord Krishna is actually the form of the topmost variety of religion. Other variety of religion actually are stepping stones towards this particular religion, which is surrender unto the Lord. So that is how Lord Krishna is rejecting the limb of bhakti, which is uh, varnashram as a limb of bhakti. Srila Rupa Goswami is rejecting in this particular commentary. Apart from that, let us also look at uh, one reference Srila Rupa Goswami now gives from Srimad Bhagavatam. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, Rupa Goswami tells how long varnashram duties are applicable. So varnashram duties are certainly good to follow, but they are not the ultimate form of religion. And here in Srimad Bhagavatam, we find a reference how long varnashram duties actually are applicable. Here it says, Tavat karmani kurvita na nirvidyeta yavata mat katha shravanadauva shraddha yavan na jayate. One should perform the daily and periodic varnashram activities until one becomes detached from material sense gratification and develops faith for hearing and chanting about me. Me means Krishna. So this verse has been spoken by Lord Krishna himself in Srimad Bhagavatam. Here Lord Krishna is saying that one can continue to do the daily and periodic varnashram activities until one becomes detached from material sense gratification and develops faith in the hearing and chanting about the Lord. So, until and unless we have developed this attachment, or unless we have developed this taste for Shravan and Kirtan about Lord Krishna, till then only we should be performing these daily and periodic Varnashram activities. And I mentioned, I give you the example of Varnashram activities, like, for example, following this fasting, like uh, uh, this fasting, Karwa Chauth fasting, the Shraddha ceremony, and so on and so forth. So these are some periodic Varnashram activities. Uh, People can leave these Varnashram activities if they are fully engaged in proper Shravan and Kirtan about Lord Krishna. So with this, the Nectar of Devotion, chapter number 13 ends here. And now the chapter 14 actually begins. Now, before I actually enter into the chapter 14, subject matter of chapter 14, this topic of Varna and Ashram we can understand by one more angle. And I was discussing in the beginning of class with Kartar Prabhuji about the Varna aspect. In the previous discussion in our Bhagavad Gita class that we take in Hindi, Kartarji had mentioned about one devotee by the name Ravi Das. Now, who is this Ravi Das? Ravi Das is a spiritual master of Mirabai, the very famous Veerabai, who is very much famous for her poetry, her devotion towards Lord Krishna. Now, this Ravi Das is actually coming from a very low Varna. Uh, but despite being coming from a very low Varna, uh, he was exalted enough in devotion, and he was so exalted enough that he had this disciple in the form of Mirabai. So the example I'm giving here is that devotional service actually is independent of Varna. It is not dependent upon Varna. Even if you look at Mirabai, Mirabai comes from a Kshatriya family, Kshatriya background. But despite coming from a Kshatriya background, uh, devotion was not any hindrance for her. She could easily progress in the devotional service of the Lord simply by following the principles of devotional service. So, like that, we can give this example also, that Even if somebody is appearing in a lower varna, it is not restriction on any kind as progressing in devotional service. Now we have discussed about varnashram, not a limb of bhakti. Similarly, Gyan and Vairagya are also not limbs of bhakti. Gyan and Vairagya. Now, in order to explain this point, Srila Rupa Goswami first of all makes a statement in verse number 248. He says, Gyan and Vairagya could be little useful in the beginning while entering the path of bhakti. Why? Because it helps in giving attachment to unwanted things. But they are not angas of bhakti. So here Srila Rupa Goswami enters into the discussion about Gyan and Vairagya are not limbs of bhakti by making a statement that in the beginning they may be helpful, because when we enter into bhakti we also want to give some unwanted things, like for example intoxication, meat eating, relationship, illicit relationship with other sex, and so on. We have been mentioning about these things again and again, so I will not repeat. So in the beginning some Gyan, some Vairagya is helpful, but ultimately it is not anga of bhakti. And then he continues to in fact Srila Jeev Goswami, who is writing a commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu's verses, Srila Jeev Goswami explains in detail how Gyan and specifically Vairagya are not considered as angas of bhakti. Here, first of all, we will focus on Gyan. Here, Gyan means Brahma Gyan, which has three stages. So here, Jeev Goswami, while writing the commentary on this particular verse number 248, explains the meaning of word Gyan. So Gyan in general would mean knowledge. But sometimes when we specifically mention Gyan Yoga, or in relation to Gyan Yoga, when we use this word called Gyan, actually it means Brahma Gyan. Yeah, Brahma Gyan. And what is Brahma Gyan? Brahma Gyan actually has three stages. Knowledge of Jiva, knowledge of Brahman, and knowledge of their oneness. Now you might have heard about this famous Brahma Sutra, Tat Tvam Asi. We have discussed about this topic of Tat Tvam Asi in our lectures in Bhagavad Gita also, where I think, if I recall, if I'm not mistaken, we have discussed about this in uh, probably in chapter number 16, Tattvam Asi. So, knowledge of Jiva is actually knowledge of Tvam. Tvam means Tattvam Asi means you are that. You means Tvam, that means Brahman, and you are that means it is actually trying to say that you and Brahman are same. You and Brahman are one. So the impersonalist Gyanis actually understand this verse Tattvam Asi as that the Jiva is one with the Brahman, one with the Supreme. That is how the impersonalist Brahma Gyanis actually understand like this. So this is the same thing which Srila Jeev Goswami is now explaining here. Gyan means Brahma Gyan, and it has three stages. Knowledge of Jiva, that I am a spirit soul. That knowledge is there, which is the Tvam knowledge. Knowledge of Brahman. Knowledge of Brahman means uh, there is supreme Brahman. There is Brahman that exists, which is the controller, which is the maintainer. Uh, that knowledge is knowledge of Brahman. And then the third part is knowledge of their oneness, and which is Tattvam Asi. That Jiva is one with Brahman, or Jiva is same as Brahman. Now, what Jeev Goswami is saying here is, for bhakti, knowledge of Tvam, that is knowledge of Jiva, and knowledge of Brahman, that is knowledge of Tat, that is okay. These 2 points are okay for knowledge of bhakti. For practicing bhakti, that I am spirit soul and I am part of Brahman, which is the supreme spirit, that much knowledge for bhakti is okay. But realization of oneness should be rejected. For bhakti, for advancing in bhakti, understanding that I am same as Brahman, or I am same as Lord, I am same as Lord Krishna, that is that kind of oneness that should be rejected. So Gyan and Vairagya are only helpful if we are developing this knowledge of Jiva and knowledge of Brahman. But if we start to develop this knowledge that I am one with Brahman or I am one with the Lord, then it is not correct. So our philosophy is that we are not one with Brahman, we are actually servants of Brahman, or we are servants of the Lord. The Lord is supreme and we are the servants of the Lord. Lord is great, we are tiny. Lord is great, we are small. That is the knowledge in bhakti. So that is how Gyan has been not considered as a limb of bhakti. Similarly, Vairagya is also not considered as a limb of bhakti. Why? What does Vairagya means? Vairagya means rejecting the world. Like the Gyan Yogi says, Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya. Only truth is the Brahman, but this material world, this is Mithya. So they reject the world. So what is bhakti actually? Bhakti means detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna. So in bhakti, we also reject matter. No, we reject matter in one sense that it will take us away from Lord Krishna. In that sense, we reject matter. But we attach ourselves to Krishna. We want to attach ourselves to Krishna. But what is the definition of Vairagya? Vairagya says detachment from everything, detachment from matter. So, in the name of Vairagya, the person who is practicing Vairagya, what can potentially happen is that the person actually rejects Krishna also. In the name of Vairagya, if attachment to Krishna is also rejected, that is contrary to bhakti. So while practicing Vairagya, people may reject, if somebody offers someone prasad, the person may reject prasad also. So that kind of rejection is not good. So in the name of Vairagya, if we reject Krishna also, that is contrary to bhakti. So that is why Gyan and Vairagya are not limbs of bhakti. In this verse, now from verse number 248 to 58, Srila Rup Goswami is making one observation. He's saying bhakti, and he's comparing bhakti and Gyan and Vairagya. He's saying Yad Ubhe Chitta Kathinya Hetu Praya Satam Mate Sukumar Swabha Veyam Bhaktis Tadhetur Irita Sukumar Swabhaveyam Bhaktis Tadhetur Irita. What he's saying is, because Gyan and Vairagya generally make the heart harsh, that authoritative devotees have concluded that Bhakti alone, whose nature is very tender, sweet, and soft, is the cause of entering into bhakti. Now, he's making a very, very important point, very significant point. What is the problem with Gyan and Vairagya? What is the problem? The problem with Gyan and Vairagya is that it makes the heart very hard, very harsh. Kathor hriday. Yad ubhe chitta kathinya. Kathinya means kathor. Kathor means hard. It is hard. And because it makes the heart hard or harsh, the authoritative devotees have concluded that bhakti alone is the cause of entering into bhakti. And what is the nature of bhakti? The nature of bhakti is that bhakti is very tender. Tender means very soft. Hmm? It is very sweet and it is very soft. The meaning of word tender here is it is very sweet and it is very soft. Like for example, if you want to bite something very hard, it is very difficult to break with your mouth. But is something very sweet and very soft, it is very relishable, it is very enjoyable. So the practice, the transcendental practice of bhakti in itself is very sweet and very enjoyable. So that is the problem with Gyan and Vairagya. Now let us see how Gyan and Vairagya are harsh. How, first of all, let us see how Gyan makes one's heart harsh. Why? It says it requires deliberation on the truth, that is tattva, by defeating a variety of other philosophies. This process is very dry in nature. Deliberation on the truth, that is tattva, by defeating a variety of other philosophies. So in Gyan Yoga, what do? We simply do philosophical speculation, like neti neti. For example, in neti neti, we try to philosophically try to understand that how this earth element, this prithvi element is not the absolute truth, how this water element is not the absolute truth. And that absolute truth is also impersonal in nature. Impersonal means which has no form, which has no attributes, etc., etc. So simply focusing on how these material elements are not absolute truth, that is the process the Gyan Yogi follow. And it is very dry in nature. There is no taste in it. There is no enjoyment. There is no relish in it. So this is process is very dry in nature. Now, how Vairagya makes one's heart harsh? Vairagya means what? Rejecting everything. Uh, if somebody brings you prasad, prasad may be delicious. Vairagya, the person who is Vairagi, he will say that no, we should not eat very delicious food. It will develop attachment, our attachment to this food. That is how they will reject everything. So Vairagya requires renouncing the enjoyment by repeated toleration of suffering. So what happens is they will purposefully tolerate, they will purposefully say that we will like to suffer, we will like to reject all these enjoyments, and we want to now invite suffering. That kind of they will like to tolerate this suffering. This is again very dry in nature. So the living entity doesn't really like this kind of approach. It is very dry, it is very harsh. But bhakti is extremely tender. And how bhakti is extremely tender? Because it consists solely of thinking of Lord's sweet form, qualities, and pastimes. Bhakti should be performed with the desire to make the heart melt in relation to the Lord. So the very process of bhakti is very sweet. How? In bhakti, what do? We do Shravan and Kirtan. What kind of Shravan we do? We hear about the pastimes of the Lord. What kind of pastimes? Lord Krishna killed Putana. But even when Lord Krishna killed Putana, who came to poison Lord Krishna, still the Lord is so magnanimous, Lord is so dayalu, Lord is so kripalu, that he gave Putana the position of mother in the spiritual world. So when we hear these kind of stories about the Lord, that such a beautiful heart our Lord has, our heart actually melts in relation with the Lord. Similarly, Lord Ramchandra's pastimes. Shabri, Shabri who was waiting for the whole life for Lord Ram to come to his ashram. Well, Shabri, who was from the society perspective was considered to be a low caste woman or coming from a low varna. Even that lady, when she gives uh, the berries, which was first of all tasted by herself to the Lord relishes those berries. Like we see that how Lord actually is so bhavagrahi. He so much appreciates our love. So these kind of sweet, very nectarian pastimes about the Lord tends to make the heart melt, the devotee's heart melt in relation to the Lord. And this kind of sweetness, this kind of emotional connect with the Lord is that is what happens in bhakti, and that is what makes bhakti extremely tender. So the jiva easily identifies these kind of practices of bhakti, and it is not natural for the jiva to identify the practices of jnana and not natural to identify the practices of vairagya. So that is why jnana and vairagya are not limbs of bhakti. Now the Rup Goswami gives one reference from Srimad Bhagavatam, and here in this reference, Lord Krishna is speaking to Uddhava. He's saying, for those who are seriously engaged in my bhakti, the cultivation of jnana and vairagya are not very favorable. That statement is coming from Srimad Bhagavatam. So here Krishna himself is confirming that jnana and vairagya are not very favorable for those who are engaged in Krishna bhakti. Now, next, Srila Rup Goswami makes a comment in verse number 251 of Bhakti Samrat Sindhu. He says, however, the goals of Gyan, Vairagya, and other processes are achieved by Bhakti alone. He's saying that if somebody is not practicing Gyan and Vairagya, there is no question of lamenting, there is no loss. Because if you are practicing bhakti, you can achieve the goals of jnana and you can achieve the goal of vairagya simply by practicing bhakti. There is no separate need to practice jnana, there is no separate need to practice vairagya, because if you only practice bhakti, you will achieve the goal of jnana and vairagya. And here in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, 11th verse, Lord Krishna himself confirms that a devotee cannot be in darkness. Cannot be in darkness, where darkness means what? Darkness means ajnana. Here, darkness is compared to ajnana. A devotee cannot be in darkness, as the Lord shows special favor and enlightens him from within. Enlightens the devotee from within. Here, if you go and look at this verse, the Lord says that if the devotee engages in my devotional service, then I enlightens him from within how to progress in bhakti. So here, one reference already I have given uh, uh, here, that the goal of gyan is automatically achieved by bhakti, because Lord promises in Bhagavad Gita. Lord says that if you are practicing bhakti, I will give you that gyan myself. You don't need to worry about it. Then about vairagya. uh, Gyan, oh, sorry. So this is the reference that has been given with reference to Gyan, and with Gyan actually produces Vairagya. So actually it also applies to Vairagya also. The purpose of Gyan is to create Vairagya, and if the Lord Himself is giving Gyan into the heart of the devotee, then Vairagya automatically manifests, and we will see later on also how Vairagya is also related with the practice of bhakti. But before we see Vairagya coming from Bhakti, let us see in Srimad Bhagavatam, where a reference has been given that a devotee, leave alone Vairagya and Gyan, even if you are, even if the devotee is having some material desires also, that is fulfilled by Bhakti itself. Here, Srimad Bhagavatam, verse number 32 and 33 are given. Yat karma bhir yat tapasa jnana vairagyastascha yat योगेन दान धर्मेण श्रेयोभिर इतरैरपि सर्वं मद्भक्ति योगेन मद्भक्तो लभतेञ्जसा स्वर्गापवर्गं मदधाम कथाञ्चिद् यदि वञ्चिता कथाञ्चिद् यदि वञ्चति वाञ्छति, sorry, कथाञ्चिद् यदि वाञ्छति. So here Lord Krishna is here the verse is saying everything that can be achieved by fruitive activities, austerities, like karma and tapa, fruitive activities and austerities, jnana and vairagya, knowledge and renunciation, mystic yoga, charity, religious duties, is and other such auspicious acts of perfecting life is easily achieved by my devotee through loving service unto me. If at all my devotees desire heaven, liberation, or residence in my abode, they easily achieve such boons for devotional service. Now, here you can see, I think almost every kind of activity has been covered: fruitive activity, austerity, jnana, vairagya, yoga, charity, religious duties, and then if not has been covered anything in this, then in general statement has been given other such auspicious acts of perfecting life is easily achieved by my devotee through loving service unto me. So if we are thinking that we are entering into bhakti while we are leaving our other spiritual practices which we have been regularly doing in the past, then need not worry. If you are engaging into bhakti process will take care of everything. That is what Lord is mentioning through the scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam. And bhakti destroys material attraction. Bhakti destroys material attraction. Here, what it says, Ruchim udvahatas tatra janasya bhajane hare vishayeshu garishtopi ragha prayo viliyate. Ragha prayo viliyate. If a person has a taste for worshipping Lord Hari, even if he has strong material attractions, they will be destroyed they will be destroyed during sadhana. So here the statement has been made that even if somebody has some material attraction but has started worshipping Lord Hari, then those material attraction will be destroyed during the sadhana stage. So material attraction would mean that he doesn't have vairagya, he doesn't have detachment from material things. But here that statement is there that if we start worshipping Lord Hari, that material attraction will automatically, slowly and gradually, it will go away once we start practicing sadhana. The hardness of heart caused by practice of vairagya will not take place, and still vairagya will manifest. So here in the commentary, Srila Jiva Goswami is making a very nice statement. It is saying that if we are practicing bhakti, we will automatically achieve vairagya without the hardening of the heart. But if we practice only vairagya, the hardening of the heart will be there. So bhakti is so nice that vairagya manifests without the hardening, without the harshness in the heart. And what is that technique by which vairagya will manifest in bhakti? Let us see. Here, the Rupa Goswami is making this statement. This is not coming from any scripture. This is the statement by Srila Rupa Goswami. He's saying about the concept of yukta vairagya. So, how this, what does the vairagya in bhakti means? Vairagya in the strict sense means rejecting everything, yeah? Detachment from everything. I don't have attachment to my mobile. I don't have attachment to uh, my house. I don't have attachment to my family. So that is the kind of vairagya that generally people would understand. But vairagya in bhakti is something very different, something special, and that is where the concept of yukta vairagya is coming. Yukta vairagya is a vairagya that happens in bhakti. And what does yukta vairagya means? Yukta vairagya is, Srila Rupa Goswami is giving this definition. He's saying अनासक्तस्य विषयान् यथाराहम् उपयुञ्जताः निर्बन्ध कृष्ण संबंधे युक्तं वैराग्यम उच्यते निर्बन्ध कृष्ण संबंधे युक्तं वैराग्यम उच्यते. It is saying, while remaining detached from material objects, if one uses them to the extent they are favorable for bhakti and in relationship with Krishna, such a detachment is said to be suitable for bhakti. A very important concept which, dear devotees, we should understand. Yukta Vairagya. I will repeat this, while remaining detached from material objects. So we should remain detached with material objects as devotees. But we should not hate those material objects. We should not kind of despise those material objects. What we should do? How should we look at those objects? Our viewpoint of looking at those objects should be, if one uses them to the extent they are favorable for bhakti and in relationship with Krishna, then such a detachment is said to be suitable for bhakti. Now, what a hardcore Vairagi will look at a material object? Hardcore Vairagi will look at the material object with a vision of statement, with a vision of hatred. I don't want this. Just take this away from me. It will actually corrupt me. It will actually make me fall down from my path of renunciation, from my path of Vairagya. But devotee does not hate material objects. Devotee is detached from material object, but it does not hate material object. What does he do? He uses those material object if that object can be used in the service of Krishna. He will use that material object in the service of Krishna, and he will look at this material object as if it is related with Krishna. That is how he will look at it. And when he looks at the material object in relation with Krishna, he doesn't hate that object, because a devotee is trying to develop love for Krishna. So anything related with Krishna, he develops love for it. But at the same time, he remains detached, because he understands that this object actually belongs to Krishna. It doesn't belong to me. When he says he doesn't belongs to the devotee, the detachment is there. When he says the object belongs to Krishna, the love is there. So the special type of vairagya that is there in devotional practice in bhakti is known as yukta vairagya. So an example has been given by Prabhupada. Let the palatable dishes be prepared, but unless they are offered to Krishna, one should not accept them for eating. So palatable dishes. Palatable dishes means very tasty dishes. So a strict vairagi will reject palatable dishes. No, it will develop attachment to palatable dishes. I will reject these dishes. But bhakti yogi does not reject palatable dishes. What he will do? He will prepare nice foodstuffs. But he will prepare nice foodstuffs with the mentality that I am cooking for my dear Lord Krishna. And he will offer that food stuff to Krishna. And when he had done that offering to Krishna, he will enjoy those dishes, he will enjoy those palatable dishes as prasad of Krishna. So every activity in bhakti becomes an activity which is connected with Krishna, and that is why the heart is still remains tender, heart is still remains soft. Although the feeling of renunciation, the feeling of viragya also manifests. So it is a very, you would say, a very miraculous or a very, I would say, a genius kind of a process, bhakti yoga, where the viragya is also manifesting, but at the same time the heart is not becoming hardened, heart is not becoming harsh, heart is also becoming sweet and soft and tender. So that is the beauty of bhakti. So this vow of rejecting anything not offered to Krishna is renunciation. This is what Srila Prabhupada explains in his commentary. Let us move forward. He's giving more examples of Yukt Vairagya. Srila Prabhupada in Nectar of Devotion giving more examples. He's saying one should not give up anything which can be utilized in the service of the Lord. That is the secret of bhakti. So we are using laptops, we are using internet, we are using Zoom software in the process of bhakti. So we are not rejecting laptops, we are not using Zoom, we are not rejecting internet, etc., etc. We are all using all these things in the service of Lord Krishna, and that is the secret of bhakti. Prabhupada is giving examples which were more relevant in his times, even relevant today also. But the kind of examples he's giving were the technological gadgets that were considered maybe to be more advanced in maybe 60s, 70s, and so on. So he's giving an example of typewriters, dictating machines, tape recorders, microphones, airplanes, etc., etc. And also he makes a reference to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. He's saying, Prabhupada is saying, Arjuna utilized his fighting abilities in bhakti. With such sentiment for Krishna, we can accept anything. So even uh, an activity which is generally considered abominable. If I start street fighting with someone down in the road, people will not look at me with a very uh, good good view. No, they will not have a very good impression about me. Oh, he's shouting loudly, he's raising hands, he's using weapons. Oh, fighting is not considered very uh, spiritual in general sense. But here Prabhupada is giving an example from Bhagavad Gita. He's saying that Arjuna utilized the spirit of fighting, the activity of fighting in bhakti. So the yuddha, the fighting that Arjuna did in Bhagavad Gita is actually a bhakti, is actually a devotional service. With such sentiment for Krishna, we can accept anything. So that is the example Srila Prabhupada is giving. Our vision is that Krishna is everything. Now he's summarizing everything in a more philosophical statement. He's saying our vision is that Krishna is everything, the cause and the effect. What does cause means? Everything comes from Krishna, and everything that comes from Krishna, because it is coming from Krishna, has to be used in the service of Krishna. So Krishna is everything, the cause of everything, and whatever has come from Krishna is also actually can be seen in relation to Krishna. So the cause and the effect. Nothing belongs to us. Krishna's things must be used in service of Krishna. So if you remember, when we read Ishopanishad, Isha Vasyam idam sarvam, yat kincha jagatyam jagat, isn't it? So Isha Vasyam means everything actually belongs to the Ishvara, everything actually belongs to the controller. So the same spirit is now being mentioned here in the Yukta Vairagya. Our vision is that Krishna is everything, the cause and effect. Nothing belongs to us. Krishna's things must be used in service of Krishna. So that is the Yukta Vairagya philosophy. Again, the theme of Gyan Vairagya are not limbs of bhakti continues. Now, here in verse number 256, Srila Rupa Goswami gives an example, a definition of that kind of Vairagya which is actually useless. That Vairagya should be avoided. And here, that Vairagya by definition is known as Phalagu Vairagya. Phalagu Vairagya, which is useless renunciation. प्रापंचिकत्या बुद्धया हरिसंबंधे वस्तुनः मुमुक्षुभि परित्यागो वैराग्यम फल्गु कथ्यते. So what is Phalugu Vairagya? He is giving this definition in these three lines. thinking some objects are simply material, although they are related to Lord Hari, can be used in his service, and thus rejecting them while desiring liberation. So, if you see any object which has the potential to be utilized in the Lord's service, but we reject that object, considering that I should reject this object because I am looking for liberation, this object will engage me or will make me make my vairagya, uh, reduce my vairagya, then such a vairagya or such a renunciation is known as phalgu vairagya, is called useless renunciation. So you will see in Srila Prabhupada's life also, Srila Prabhupada has actively used use of aeroplane. He has used all these facilities like typewriter, dictating machines, printing press, etc., etc. But he has used with the vision that these are actually should be these are Krishna's properties, and I should be using these for the Lord's service. Similarly, Bhakti Siddhant Maharaj, the Gurudev of Srila Prabhupada, also once he was invited by the Britishers. And when Britishers invited Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wore a overcoat, a nice coat. He used the best possible car that was available on that in that period, and he used that car, went in a nicely dressed overcoat to to meet the Britishers. Why? Because he wanted to use these articles because he understood that if he would go to the Britishers to meet Britishers in the attire of a sannyasi, in an attire of a renunciate, the Britishers may not appreciate Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. But if he would go in a form which is opulent, which is nice, like in a car, in a nicely dressed coat, etc., the Britishers will pay some attention to what Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj is going to say. So a devotee has to be very intelligent. He has to understand the meaning of detachment. He also has to understand what could be used in Lord's service and has to make a call accordingly. So that is why this definition of vairagya, yukta vairagya, phalgu vairagya, etc. are very important definitions, and we should understand those. Moving ahead, false vairagya is rejected. The duties of varnashram and impersonal gyan have already been rejected as angas of bhakti by the definition of Uttama Bhakti. Yet to make it clearer, the false type of vairagya has been rejected as an anga of bhakti. So here, Srila Rupa Goswami in these two verses, 257 and 258, is making a general statement that in the definition of Uttama Bhakti, I have already mentioned that gyan and karma has to be rejected. So gyan means Brahma gyan, and karma means karma kanda, that is the particular activities of varnashram, that is already I have mentioned in the definition of Uttama Bhakti. Now here I am adding little more, which is the phalgu vairagya. Useless renunciation should also be rejected as the anga of bhakti. Now somebody might claim that if phalgu vairagya is rejected in the from the practice of Uttama Bhakti, then why it is not mentioned in the Uttama Bhakti definition? So the answer of that is the proper terminology that Srila Rupa Goswami uses in the definition of Bhakti is Gyan Karma Adi. Adi. Now here Adi includes multiple things. Adi includes multiple things. Now Adi could include Vairagya, Adi could include Yoga, Sankhya, and other processes. So Gyan, Vairagya are the prominent ones that have been rejected in the definition of Uttama Bhakti, but other processes like Vairagya, Yoga, Sankhya, etc., Jyotish, etc., have been rejected in this word called Adi. So the definition of Uttama Bhakti is complete. We should not doubt about that particular definition's completeness. Now, the topic that we started to discuss about Varnashram, not a limb of bhakti, Gyan is not a limb of bhakti, and Vairagya is not a limb of bhakti, is done. Now we are moving more ahead. Here now we are talking about bhakti with dependence on dhana and shishya, which is followers. So our topic is now dependence on dhana, shishya, and vivek and other material qualities. So vivek and other material qualities, you can call it as good qualities. Dependence on dhana, shishya, and vivek are also not limbs of bhakti. So let us first of all look how dependence on dhana is not a limb of bhakti, and how dependence on Shishya is also not a limb of bhakti. Before we look at the example, uh, let us see what Srila Rupa Goswami is saying in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 259. That bhakti which is accomplished by dependence on wealth, followers, cannot be considered as an anga of Uttama Bhakti because it destroys the pure nature of that bhakti. It is far away from Uttama Bhakti. The pure nature of Bhakti. Pure nature of Bhakti means it is not dependent upon any dhana, any followers. So that is what Rup Goswami is saying, that it is uh, dependence on wealth and dependence on followers is not the anga of Uttama Bhakti. And here, how we understand these two examples, dependence on wealth and dependence on followers, let us see. Wealthy person giving large donation for construction of temple should not think that the subsequent activities performed therein are his bhakti. So let us understand this statement which Prabhupada is making. Sorry, this statement is not made by Prabhupada. This is statement actually is made by, I think, Jeev Goswami in the commentary. So if there is a wealthy person and he gives large donation to construct temple, so till here, this is part of Uttama Bhakti. People can give donation for devotional activities, and that is very much part of Uttama Bhakti. 64 limbs of Uttama Bhakti, no problem. But problem starts if that wealthy person starts to think that now in this temple there will be devotional activities performed by various people. Now, whatever devotional activities those people are performing, that is also my bhakti. So that kind of dependence on wealth is not a limb of bhakti. Should not think that the subsequent activities performed in the temple are the bhakti of the wealthy person who gave that donation. So that is not the part of anga of Uttama Bhakti. But then another example, this is related to Shishya, followers. A guru may train disciples to worship the deity, but the worship performed by the disciple is their own bhakti, not guru's bhakti. So as a spiritual master, a person may train a lot of followers, lot of shishyas he may have, but then the guru may start thinking that now my disciple is performing this arti to the Lord. Actually, it is my bhakti. The guru might think like that. I trained him because I trained him. Whatever activity is doing by because of that training is actually my bhakti. The guru is actually mistaken there. So a guru, that is not guru's bhakti. So these are the two examples of why bhakti with dependence on dhana and shishya are also not limbs of bhakti, because it destroys the pure nature of that bhakti. Moving ahead. Bhakti with dependence on vivek and other material qualities. Vivek and other material qualities, let us sum this all as good qualities. Now vivek and other material qualities means what? Discrimination and other material good qualities are not angas of Uttama Bhakti, since on their own they take shelter of devotees practicing Uttama Bhakti. So here what Srila Rupa Goswami is saying is that good qualities, example of good qualities could be ahimsa, vegetarianism, cleanliness, celibacy, etc. etc. Now these good qualities are not considered as angas of bhakti, because uh, these good qualities they themselves take shelter of devotees who are practicing Uttama Bhakti. So Uttama Bhakti can cause good qualities, but good qualities cannot cause Uttama Bhakti in an individual. Say for example, uh, a devotee need not practice anything but Krishna consciousness. All the good qualities of devatas automatically develop in a devotee. And an example is given. A devotee is naturally non-violent and vegetarian, but a vegetarian is not necessarily a devotee, nor is a non-violent person. So here the example is, say if a person is vegetarian, that vegetarianism, that practice of vegetarianism is not going to lead him to pure Uttama Bhakti. It is not possible. Uh, But if a devotee is there, then by practicing of devotional service, he will or she will one day will become vegetarian and non-violent. but vice versa is not seen. Vice versa is not possible. You will see here. uh, Now bhakti with dependence on vivek. Let us see more basic rules of conduct, that is yam and niyam. For example, cleanliness, etc., appear automatically in those who are extremely dedicated to Krishna. Thus, they are not included in the angas of bhakti. So, if somebody is following yam and niyam, what are yam and niyam? Ahimsa, truthfulness. Asteya means not stealing anything. Brahmacharya, celibacy. Aparigraha. Aparigraha means not accumulating a lot of wealth. Niyama means shaucha. Shaucha means cleanliness. Santosh. Santosh means satisfaction. Tapa means austerity. Swadhyaya means reading scriptures. Reading scriptures means non-devotional scriptures here. Ishwar Pranidhan means connecting oneself to the Lord. Connecting oneself to the Lord mostly in the terms of impersonal connection. So here, basic rules of conduct like yama and niyama, for example, cleanliness, etc., appear automatically in those who are extremely dedicated to Krishna. So if you are a devotee, these qualities like ahimsa, satya, etc., etc., will automatically manifest. So thus they are not included in the angas of bhakti. So if you are practicing cleanliness, does not mean that you will become devotee one day. But if you are following devotional service, if you are following bhakti, it means that you will naturally develop the quality of cleanliness in your life, one time or the other. More examples. Now, Rup Goswami mentions a verse from Skanda Puran to affirm the point that by bhakti, good qualities manifest. And what is that verse? That verse is spoken by Parvata Muni, where he is appreciating one hunter called Mrigari. Now, this Mrigari was a hunter and he was a very cruel hunter. His specialty was that when he will go for hunting, he will not kill the animal completely. He will leave him half dead, half alive, just to enjoy the pain of that animal. But once this Mrigari, the hunter, came in connection with Narad Muni, and Narad Muni uh, gave him this gyan of bhakti. And after associating with Narad Muni, this Mrigari became a devotee. And after he became a devotee, he was not interested even killing an ant. So when Parvat Muni noticed this observation regarding Mrigari, he made a statement. Parvat Muni appreciated hunter Mrigari, who was unwilling to kill even an ant. He's saying the qualities such as non-violence are not very astonishing because a devotee of Lord Hari is never a cause of distress to anyone. So here Parvat Muni is actually appreciating the uh, bhakti quality, the practice of bhakti, but he's actually not appreciating the quality of non-violence. He's saying that non-violence is not very something very special, not something very unique, or there is nothing special about the quality of non-violence, because actually what is special about is the quality of devotional service. Because if somebody develops devotional service, then nobody will be a cause of distress to anyone. Nobody would want to bring any distress to anyone. So that is the story that comes in Skanda Puran. And Rup Goswami further emphasizes on the point that bhakti is the mother of all good qualities, rather than good qualities is the cause of bhakti. In order to emphasize that point, Rup Goswami mentions this story from Skanda Puran. Now, coming to the concluding slides of our presentation today. Here, devotees acquire all good qualities. Again, there is a verse from Skanda Puran where it is mentioned Antah Shuddhir Bahir Shuddhis Tapah Shanti Adayas Tatha Ami Guna Prapadyante Hari Seva Bhikatminam. Hari Seva Bhikatminam. So, what it is saying? Internal and external purity, austerity, peacefulness, and other qualities take shelter of persons who desire to serve Hari. So again, emphasizing that point, Srila Rupa Goswami mentions one verse from Skanda Purana. Now coming to the concluding slide of the presentation today. Here, Srila Rupa Goswami once again makes, here Srila Rupa Goswami is elaborating on one point before concluding his topic on Vaidhi Sadhan Bhakti about Ek Anga and Anek Anga Bhakti. So he is mentioning in verse number 264 that bhakti in which one anga is steadily performed as the principal one, with others as secondary, or many angas are performed according to one's desire, brings about the desired result, that is bhava and prema. So what Srila Rupa Goswami is saying is that he has given a lot of limbs of bhakti. Now, if someone chooses to perform only one limb of bhakti as the main anga, while performing other angas in a little bit, maybe some anga sometime, some anga sometime, but he's only focused only on one anga, like for example shravanam, or maybe kirtanam, or maybe only smaranam, only one anga. So this is one situation. But there is another situation where there is one devotee, where there is one practitioner who is not focusing only on one anga, rather he is or she is doing all the angas sometimes or the other, anek anga. So ek anga bhakti practice or anek anga bhakti practice. So Rup Goswami is making a point that either you do ek anga bhakti or you do anek anga bhakti. The potential in both of these strategies is that in both of these strategies you can achieve the desired result. In ek anga bhakti also you can achieve bhav and prema. In anek anga bhakti also you can achieve bhav and prema. And then he continues to give two references. One reference comes from Padyavali, and another reference comes from Srimad Bhagavatam. So reference from Ekanga Bhakti comes from Padyavali. And in this Padyavali verse, there is a list of devotees which has been provided, where it has been mentioned and Parikshit perfected his life by doing only Shravanam. Shukadev Goswami perfected his life uh, by doing only Kirtanam. And Prahlad Maharaj perfected his life only doing Smaranam. Like that, he gives this list for all the 9 limbs of Bhakti: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Vishnu, Pad Sevanam, etc. etc. by giving this list of devotees in verse number 265 of Bhakti Samrat Sindhu. Then for Anek Anga Bhakti, he gives an example of Ambarish Maharaj. And this is the verse coming from Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this verse, Ambarish Maharaj has been mentioned saying that he would use his legs to go to the temple of the Lord. He would use his hands to clean the temple of the Lord. He would use his eyes to take the darshan of the Lord. So he was doing all kind of bhakti practices. And by doing all multiple type of bhakti practices, Ambarish Maharaj result achieved the desired result of bhav and prema. And like this, he concludes this discussion on Ek Anga and Anek Anga Bhakti. Ultimately, the final paragraph that he writes uh, 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 in this chapter of chapter 14, in Bhakti Samrat Sindhu, Rup Goswami mentions that some person call Vaidhi Bhakti also as Maryada Marg, since it is bound on strong limitation of scriptural rules. So he concludes this one simple statement that some people call Vaidhi Bhakti also as Maryada Marg. Maryada means because in this practice, we strongly follow scriptural rules and regulation. We are under the limitation of the rules and regulation of the scripture. So sometimes Vedi Bhakti is also known as Maryada Marg. So with that, uh, we will conclude our discussion on chapter number 14 of Nectar of Devotion, a very important chapter, I would say, where Srila Rupa Goswami is now concluding discussion on Vaidhi Sadhan Bhakti. And from next class, he will, from next topic in Bhakti Samrit Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami starts with Raga Nuga Sadhan Bhakti. And that is chapter number 15 in Nectar of Devotion. And we will start our discussion on this chapter in our next class. So till then, thank you very much. Uh, our class took a little more time today because the topic could not be concluded in 2 classes. So I had to take maybe some 10-15 minutes more. I hope you will forgive me for that. All glories to the Nectar of Devotion. All glories to Bhakti Samrat Sindhu. All glories to Srila Rupa Goswami. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. I hope still we will have some questions in case there are any.
Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji.
It's a very interesting and very exhaustive class, but I have a small query.
Hmm.
A lot of friends and families are practicing Vipassana,
Hmm.
and obviously they are enjoying and happy about it. So I
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
wanted to know, since they also say that they believe in scriptures and follow scriptures, so what do you have to say about Vipassana vis-a-vis bhakti, or what your good self is teaching? So
Yeah, yeah.
how is it
So
different?
I have not studied about Vipassana in great detail, but I think it has something to do with some Buddhist philosophy or so on. I'm not very sure. I have to maybe check about it. But what we are trying to say here, Srila Rupa Goswami is trying to say is that uh, uh, there are various practices of transcendence. Uh, Even
Right,
if one person starts morning walk in the morning, that morning walk also gives some benefit to that person. He will feel energetic, he will feel joyful, he will feel or she will feel much better compared to uh, the early way of life they were living. But simply having some happiness, some joy doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to take you to the perfect destination, which is the ultimate goal of life, which is the devotional service of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Now,
right.
different people come in contact with different practices in their life. They tend to get some benefit of those practices in their life, and sometimes they become so enthusiastic about those practices, they tend to think that these practices actually are the ultimate practices that they then someone need to follow in their life. That is what they think, and
Right,
they continue to hold on to those practices till the end of their life. But
right,
if we enter into the realm of devotional service, and like Rup Goswami is explaining, that the process of bhakti actually includes every other spiritual practice that exists on this planet Earth.
okay.
And if we are,
That's important here.
yeah, and if we are following this practice of bhakti, actually we need not practice separately morning walk, we need not practice separately cleanliness, we need not practice separately celibacy, we need not practice separately vegetarianism, or for that matter detachment, vairagya, gyan vairagya are sometimes like a little more elevated spiritual practices. What to
Right,
speak
right,
of elevated spiritual practices, even practices like vegetarianism, non-violence, which are at a much lower platform, even those we need not follow. Simply follow the practices of devotional service, and everything will be taken care of. That is what Rup Goswami is saying,
right.
including Vipassana.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So this is not to belittle the practice of Vipassana, but this is just to make a more uh, uh, broad statement that uh, even bhakti actually includes every other transcendental process, and that does it in a very sweet and a very loving way, that the devotee feels very much enthusiastic, very much attracted to this practice.
In that case, we can assume that it's an additional practice. The whole lecture was towards the additional practices,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Vipassana can be taken as an additional practice
Yeah,
of
so that is
bhakti.
what I was saying, jnana karma adi. So
Right,
that
right.
Vipassana is now fitted in Adi. So Vipassana
Got it.
probably would have some connotation with maybe meditation or maybe some reflection
Yes,
and those
people
kind of things.
meditate, looking internally, they observe their breath and concentrate, something like that. They do.
Yeah, so that is something which is more similar to Gyan Yoga, or I would say yoga in general,
Right,
Dhyan Yoga.
right.
That has
Most
some
likely.
connotation with Dhyan Yoga. But as we
Correct.
mentioned, Gyan Karma Adi. Now Adi includes Vairagya, Yoga, Sankhya, Jyotish, blah blah blah. Yeah,
Right, right. Thank you very much.
yeah. So if somebody decides to follow Vipassana, certainly they will feel some improvement, some benefit, some progress in their life. They will feel better, but there is more to it, and that more to it can be achieved in bhakti.
Right,
Rather, the ultimate can be achieved in bhakti.
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
हरे कृष्णा।
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
मैं कुछ परमिशन लेता हूँ कुछ कमेंट के लिए।
Kindly do. Just keep it
मेरा
short so
जो
that other
हाँ
devotees can
जी
also ask. Yeah. Okay.
जी गुरु जी, मैं सारांश में बोलूंगा कि सिर्फ सिमरन करने से
Hmm.
गुरु का, गुरु के ऊपर उसके गुरु का और फिर अल्टीमेट कृष्णा का,
Hmm.
उसी से सब कुछ मिल जाएगा।
हाँ, तो लिखा ना, एंड में हमने डिस्कस किया ना, एक अंग भक्ति एंड अनेक अंग भक्ति.
जी
So if you are attracted more towards Simran,
जी
certainly you can achieve that ultimate.
जी गुरु जी,
But
बस
that does not mean that only Simran is the, yeah. There are Shravanam, there are Smaranam, there are
जी 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 जी
I would say there are Pad Sevanam, there are Atmanivedanam, and so
जी
on and
गुरु
so forth. So those angas of bhakti also have the
जी
potential to lead the practitioner to the ultimate goal. Yeah.
ये वो तो चार है ना, सिमरन, सेवा, सत्संग, संतोष।
Santosh,
लेकिन सिम
Santosh,
हाँ जी
Santosh is now good quality. So
जी जी
Santosh alone will not take you to the devotional service. Somebody may have
जी गुरु
Santosh, but that
जी
Santoshi person may not become a devotee.
जी गुरु
But a
जी
devotee, if he continues to practice devotional service, will become Santoshi one day. That is sure.
जी गुरु जी, संतोष उसमें आ जाएगा
Huh.
ऑटोमेटिकली।
Yeah.
जी
So
गुरु जी
that is the part that we discussed, Vivek and other material qualities.
जी
That
गुरु
part
जी
that we discussed. So Vivek means including other material qualities. That includes Santosh also.
जी गुरु जी,
So
थैंक यू
Santosh
गुरु
is
जी।
not dependent on Bhakti is not dependent on Santosh. Santosh is actually end result of Bhakti, proper Bhakti.
जी गुरु जी,
Yeah.
सत्यवचन सत्यवचन गुरु जी,
Yes.
हरे
धन्यवाद।
कृष्णा प्रभु जी।
Yes, Rakesh ji. Yes.
प्रभु जी, ये वर्णाश्रम के थ्रू अगर हम ये उत्तम भक्ति का पार्ट नहीं है
Hmm.
तो हाउ कैन वी गेट उत्तम भक्ति? क्योंकि बिकॉज वी हैव टू गो थ्रू ओनली दिस वर्णाश्रम प्रोसेस,
Not necessarily. वही
देन
वही
हाउ
हमने
कैन
एक
वी
श्लोक,
गेट?
हाँ वही एक श्लोक पढ़ा ना हमने, वर्णाश्रम is not necessary for उत्तम भक्ति, but वर्णाश्रम can be a stepping stone, मतलब एक सीढ़ी के रूप में उसका प्रयोग आप कर सकते हैं to move towards bhakti, so वर्णाश्रम में जब हम होते हैं तो we do the duties of varna and ashram mainly to set an example for the society. For example, like myself and my wife both are practicing this bhakti, but my wife also does this upvas called karva chauth. When karva chauth comes, she also does upvas of karva chauth. Now what happens when she does upvas of karva chauth? That is not mandatory for her because she is already practicing uttama bhakti. So that upvas of karva chauth is not mandatory for my wife, but if my wife does this karva chauth upvas, that can actually inspire others in the society that, oh, look at that lady, she also does that karva chauth upvas. So as an example, it can help the society at large. But varnashram practices which are like yagyas, shraddhas, or upvas like karmakand upvas like raksha bandhan, tying rakhi, etc., etc., these are not anti-devotional in that sense, but considering these practices to be the absolute, to be the ultimate, is actually a covering on bhakti. Gyan karma adi anavratam. Anavratam means we should uncover our bhakti from these practices. Uncovering these practices from bhakti means that considering that these practices alone are actually will take you to the ultimate goal. That is the covering on bhakti. Like for example, if a person thinks that Prabhuji, I am doing this bhakti, this person is doing this bhakti, but this person is not doing his duties. सो कर्म ही अगर अपना नहीं किया तो भक्ति की क्या आवश्यकता है, तो भक्ति का क्या महत्व है. So that is actually a covering on bhakti. This kind of a tendency, this kind of a thinking is a covering on bhakti. Bhakta will automatically will perform his prescribed duties. That is the message we are trying to give you. If a bhakta is performing bhakti, he will certainly be very caring, very much I would say sensitive towards serving their father, mother, society, nation, uh, not only nation, society, even to the animals that they are around that bhakta. So bhakti automatically inspires these kind of tender, soft feelings that we aspire to create by following these other practices. So that is the message, including varnashram.
Right, Prabhuji. Thank you.
कोई डाउट नहीं रहना चाहिए आपके मन में. वर्ण और आश्रम का मतलब समझ में आना चाहिए और उसके बाद कोई डाउट नहीं रहना चाहिए. भगवत गीता चैप्टर 18 में आजकल
प्रभु
हम
जी, मेरा
वर्णाश्रम पढ़ रहे हैं.
थोड़ा डाउट यही था
हाँ
कि किसी को मतलब गृहस्थ आश्रम तो उसे अपनाना ही है, मान लिया वर्ण आश्रम जो 4 आश्रम है
हाँ
इनके थ्रू तो जाना ही है ना उसको, चाहे उसको प्रोसेस कोई भी हो.
हाँ. तो
इन
प्रभु जी
चारों
देखिए,
इस
हमने चर्चा करी उस टॉपिक पे. आज देखिए मैं आपको उस स्लाइड पे ले जाता हूँ. शुरुआत में ही हमने चर्चा करी. देखिए, ये देखिए, ओनली इफ मैरिज, आप देख सकते हैं स्क्रीन.
यस प्रभु जी.
Only if marriage is aimed at eventual purification and unalloyed surrender, it can be considered a subsidiary item of devotional service. अब जैसे take my example and my wife Kishori Kund Devi Dasi's example. We are in Grahasth ashram, but in Grahasth ashram our ultimate aim is to please Lord Hari. So that Grahasth ashram has become part of devotional service. But there could be many other devotees also, many other people also who are in Grahastha, who are in Grahastha ashram, but they are not ultimate, their ultimate object is not pleasing Lord Hari. They might be doing Karva Chauth, they might be doing some Shraddha ceremony of their ancestors, they might be doing some other yagyas, they might be doing some other practices like celibacy, yoga, dhyana, etc., in their Grahastha ashram. But that varnashram, that grahastha ashram is not a limb of bhakti. But our grahastha ashram is part of bhakti because it is directed towards pleasing Lord Krishna. You should understand that
राइट
difference.
प्रभु.
आप अपने मोहल्ले में निकल जाइए मेरठ में, आपको बहुत सारे परिवार ऐसे मिल जाएंगे जो धार्मिक होंगे, जो पूजा पाठ भी करते होंगे, पर उनका ऑब्जेक्टिव उत्तम भक्ति नहीं
जी
होगा. पॉसिबल
जी
है ना.
जी.
तो उनका ऑब्जेक्टिव होगा कि भाई
ठीक है
आज
प्रभु जी,
हमारे,
थैंक यू.
हाँ, तो वो आपका, लेकिन आपका ऑब्जेक्टिव उत्तम भक्ति है. आप भगवान श्री कृष्ण के चरणों की सेवा को एस्पायर कर रहे हैं. तो आप अगर अपने गृहस्थ में भी रह रहे हैं तो आपका गृहस्थ जो है वो मंदिर से कम नहीं है, वो एक भगवान श्री कृष्ण के मंदिर से कम नहीं है. जी.
थैंक
ये
यू प्रभु
ये
जी.
ये मतलब है. और आपको इसके अलावा अगर आप ये प्रैक्टिसेस कर रहे हैं तो आपको किसी और प्रैक्टिस की आवश्यकता नहीं है. ये मैसेज है, वेरी वेरी क्लियर मैसेज. आप इस क्लास को दोबारा सुनिएगा, इन स्लाइड्स को
जी
पढ़िएगा. आपको कहीं अगर कोई पॉइंट छूट गया होगा तो दोबारा सुनने में, पढ़ने में वो क्लियर हो जाएगा. और फिर भी
राइट
क्लियर नहीं
प्रभु
होता है तो प्रश्न पूछते रहिए.
जी. प्रभु जी,
जी
थैंक यू.
जी, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
यस, जयमाला माता जी. यस.
Sorry to keep you. It's quite late.
नो नो,
But
प्लीज
yes,
प्लीज. हाँ जी.
further to the question, the answer that you have answered for Prabhuji's question. But Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he does not reject such people, Prabhuji. He in fact, he in fact calls them magnanimous, udaraha.
Yeah,
So
yeah, he's not rejecting it, but he's not also labeling them as the ultimate. Rather, at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, he's saying sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam braj. Ekam, the word used is ekam. So this particular verse in the Vaishnav society is known as Charam Shloka. Charam Shloka means the ultimate. And you should also probably read that discussion between Ramananda Rai and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where he has given all these stages progressively: Swadharma Acharana, Krishna Karmarpana, Swadharma Tyag, Gyan Mishra Bhakti, then Gyan Shunya Bhakti, then he comes to Vaidhi Bhakti, then Prema Bhakti, and even in Prema Bhakti he goes to Dasya Bhakti, then Sakhya Bhakti, then Vatsalya Bhakti, and ultimately he comes to Madhurya Bhakti. So even within Vaidhi Bhakti also, the ultimate is Madhurya Bhakti. That is what we are inspiring as ISKCON devotees, as followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We are not even aspiring for Dasya Bhakti, like the Bhakti that Hanumanji was having. That is also a very topmost level, not a small level. Even if we get Dasya Bhakti, we are successful. But we want to go even beyond. We want to go to Prema Bhakti. That is also Madhurya Bhakti. So there is a level, there is a gradation of transcendence.
Yes, Prabhu, thank you so
Yeah.
much. One more, just an observation that Prabhuji, you said that a devotee, he does not have to endeavor for any good qualities because they manifest themselves in the course of his bhakti. Let us look at the other way. A person who has good qualities like say vegetarianism, or he leads a very regulated disciplined life, when he gets introduced to bhakti, won't his progress be very smooth and
Yeah.
quick? Yes.
So yeah, that's a very good point. See, the point we are trying to emphasize is that the vegetarianism doesn't lead him to bhakti. If that person will become attracted towards bhakti, it is only because of bhakti, not because he was vegetarian, not because he was celibate. He will become attracted towards maybe the beautiful form of the Lord, or maybe the tasty prasad he just ate, or maybe the nice incense smell he just smelled, or the devotees he saw in blissful kirtan, or he would become attracted towards the katha of the Lord, Lord Ramchandra Shabri, Lord Ramchandra Bharat, etc., etc. So the attraction for bhakti will come from bhakti only, not because that the person was following vegetarianism. That is the point.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hare
So
Krishna.
that is a subtle point that you need to understand, and I think you clarified it through your question. That is very good question. Yeah.
जैसे प्रभु जी अध्याय 18 में हम पढ़ रहे हैं कि वो वर्णाश्रम में रहते हुए भी
हाँ, वर्णाश्रम में अब
अगर कोई
देखिए
अपना कर्तव्य पालन करता है और भगवान की प्रसन्नता के लिए करता है तो ही कैन अचीव डिजायर्ड रिजल्ट्स।
हाँ, अब वो देखिए, अब जब हम अगली क्लास पढ़ेंगे तो उसमें आपको दिखाएंगे कि वर्णाश्रम का पालन करते हुए पहले तो वर्णाश्रम के कर्तव्य का पालन है, उसके बाद फिर वो भगवान बोलते हैं स्वकर्मणा तम अभ्यर्चा, बाय योर वर्क वर्शिप मी। ये नेक्स्ट स्टेज है, ये अगली स्टेज है। वर्णाश्रम के कर्तव्यों का पालन एक पाथ है, और वर्णाश्रम के कर्तव्यों का पालन करते हुए उन कर्तव्यों के पालन के माध्यम से भगवान की अर्चना करना, भगवान की पूजा करना, वो एक नेक्स्ट स्टेज है। अब भगवान जो है उनको 18वें अध्याय में और अगली स्टेज पर लेके जाएंगे, वो हम अगली क्लास भगवत गीता में पढ़ेंगे, आप ध्यान से सुनिएगा।
जी प्रभु जी।
वही चीज जो रूप गोस्वामी यहाँ आपको भक्ति रसामृत सिंधु में बता रहे हैं, वही बात को भगवान श्री कृष्ण ने 18वें अध्याय में वर्णाश्रम, फिर ज्ञान योग, फिर उसको भक्ति योग तक वो लेके गए हैं, वहां तक लेके गए हैं। आप देखिएगा प्रोग्रेसिवली वो आगे जाएंगे। अब तो वो आए हैं वर्णाश्रम पे, फिर वर्णाश्रम के बाद आए हैं भगवत अर्पित कर्म पे, स्वकर्मणा तम अभ्यर्चा। इसका मतलब है भगवत अर्पित कर्म, भगवान को मैंने अपने कर्म अर्पित किए हैं। लेकिन भगवान को अर्पित कर्म का मतलब क्या है कि पहले कर्म किए और फिर भगवान को अर्पित किए, ये मतलब है ना।
जी जी।
इसका मतलब जब हम कर्म कर रहे थे तो वो भक्ति नहीं थी, वो उत्तम भक्ति नहीं थी, वो कर्म मिश्रित भक्ति थी।
जब वो
उत्तम
भगवान को
भक्ति,
अर्पण किए गए तब वो
हाँ, नहीं
उत्तम
नहीं,
भक्ति हुई।
हाँ तो वो कर्म मिश्रित भक्ति हुई ना।
जी जी
उसमें कर्म मिश्रित भक्ति का मतलब ये है कि ज्ञान कर्म आदि अनावृतम। तो इसमें कर्म नहीं, कर्म का जो मतलब वो डिजायर नहीं होनी चाहिए कि मैं किसी फल की आशा के साथ कर्म कर रहा हूं। जब वो कर्म करेगा तो फल की आशा के साथ कर्म करेगा, और जब उसे फल मिलेगा तब उसका एक भाग जो है वो भक्ति में लगाएगा।
जी।
तो ये कर्म से ढकी हुई भक्ति है।
अच्छा।
दिस भक्ति एक्चुअली इज कवर्ड विद कर्म।
जी
भक्ति है लेकिन मिश्रित भक्ति है।
जी
उसमें
जी
उत्तम भक्ति क्या है? प्योर भक्ति है, शुद्ध भक्ति है।
जी जी
जैसे आप भगवान कृष्ण की कथा सुन रहे हैं, वो शुद्ध भक्ति है।
जी
उसमें कोई डिजायर नहीं, उसमें डिजायर सिर्फ ये है कि भगवान की चरणों की प्राप्ति होगी। तो
जी
मैं भगवान की कथा कह रहा हूं, उसमें कोई फल की इच्छा नहीं। उसमें फल की इच्छा मतलब सटल हो सकती है कि भाई मैं अपना नाम बनाना चाहूं, अपना बहुत गुणगान करना चाहूं एज ए टीचर, पर अगर वो नहीं है तो ये उत्तम भक्ति की श्रेणी में आता है।
जी
जी, अब आप समझे मतलब इसका जो मतलब है। आई होप यू आर एबल टू अप्रिशिएट इट।
जी जी जी। थैंक यू प्रभु।
ओके सर, ओके जी, थैंक यू
ओके
वेरी
जी।
मच, थैंक्स अ लॉट।
हरे कृष्णा प्रभु जी।
हरे कृष्णा।
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
हरे कृष्णा
Wonderful,
प्रभु जी।
wonderful
थैंक
class.
यू प्रभु, थैंक यू
Wonderful.
प्रभु
Thank you
जी,
very much for
थैंक यू वनिजा
Hare
माता जी,
Krishna Prabhu.
थैंक यू। हरे कृष्णा जी, थैंक यू।
Hare Krishna.
हरे कृष्णा।